Hello, everyone, and welcome. I would like to begin by saying we are gathered on the homeland of the Wampanoag people. The Wampanoag tribe, also known as the people of the first light, has inhabited this land for more than 12,000 years. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wampanoag community, their past, present, and future generations. Thank you, and welcome to all of you. Welcome to our virtual event with artist Brenda Kingery and curator Heather K. Lunsford, director of the School of Visual Art at the Oklahoma City University. In tonight's program, we will engage in a conversation about Kingery's artistic influences, including abstract expressionism, indigenous traditions from Africa, Japan, and Mexico, and her interest in cultural preservation. I'm genuinely excited for our panel tonight. The work of Brenda Kingery is endlessly fascinating, and with the insights of Heather Lunsford, we'll have an opportunity to see it in a new way. Here's a quick clip of some of the work on display at the Cahoon right now. I would now like to welcome our director, Sarah Johnson, to introduce our guests.
Great. That was so nice to see all those images of Brenda's work. I'm really happy to introduce both Brenda Kingery and Heather Lunsford. Brenda Kingery is an artist, a teacher, an art historian, and I actually consider Brenda to be a national treasure. Brenda is a contemporary artist born in Oklahoma and now living in San Antonio. She earned a bachelor's degree in fine arts and history from the University of Oklahoma, attended graduate school at Ryukyus University in Okinawa, and completed a master's in arts from the University of Oklahoma. Brenda has taught drawing, painting, and Okinawan cultural history for the University of Maryland's Far East Division and at San Antonio College. And her artwork has been displayed and is in the collections of many private and public collections worldwide. She's also the founding member of Threads of Blessing International, an organization that teaches textile art and design to women in developing countries to use their artistic skills. In 2007, Brenda served on the board of the Institute of American Indian Art in Santa Fe, and was named the Dynamic Woman of the Year for the Chickasaw Nation in 2017. We're very, very honored to have Brenda's work on view at the Cahoon Museum of American Art and here with us today. And Heather is the curator at the School of Visual Arts at Oklahoma City University, who's also a multi-skilled and talented person. She's a mixed media artist who studied watercolor painting and art history at Oklahoma State University, as well as Northern Illinois University. Heather received her Master's of Arts in Administration from the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas. Heather now serves as the chair of the Studio Art and Design Department and is also the director of the Nona Jean Holsey Gallery at Oklahoma City University. So a warm welcome to both Brenda and Heather.
Thank you.
And if everybody could kindly tell us where you're watching from in the chat as a nice way to welcome Brenda and Heather. All right, wonderful. We have Falmouth, Mass. And don't be shy. The chat is a wonderful place to add your questions at the end of the discussion and add your compliments as we move along through the evening. Heather and Brenda, take it away.
Well, I don't know how many people were at the opening when Brenda and I introduced ourselves and gave our talk. Maybe a couple, but maybe not. So I'm happy to kind of give a little overview of how Brenda and I came to know each other and how this show came to be from the beginning. If you think that's a good place to start, Sarah. So I came to Oklahoma as the director of public art, and I was working at the state capitol, looking at the collections at the state capitol, and we had Native American art, but we didn't have any abstract Native American art. So I started researching, and I run across this woman named Brenda Kingery, and I'm like, man, she's from Oklahoma. She went to high school in Oklahoma City, and I'm looking at her and I'm thinking like, oh, she lives in San Antonio. Well, I used to live in San Antonio, and she seems so familiar. And then I realized that we went to church together in San Antonio, and I didn't know who she was. And her threads of blessing, we sold them at the gift shop I volunteered in at the church. And so I call Brenda, and I've only been gone from San Antonio at this point for about 6 weeks. And I go down there and we meet, and we instantly hit it off, and we really like each other a lot. And although that project of having a work in the state capitol will hopefully, it hasn't realized yet, but will hopefully happen maybe in the next year. So something I'm still working on for Brenda. What happened first was me going to OCU as the curator and calling Brenda and saying, we still need to do this show. That Brenda's work needs to be seen in Oklahoma, where she's from, and that I really wanted that to happen. So I called Brenda and said, let's partner with the Chickasaw Nation. Brenda is a Chickasaw. And I worked with a really great anthropologist who had just recently finished her degree from Stanford, Emily. And she did the sort of cultural part, and we flew down to San Antonio and spent 2 or 3 days looking at the work, interviewing Brenda, curating the work, and then had it all wrapped up and photographed and shipped up to Oklahoma. And we had a show at OCU. And in that time, we produced a catalog and a video, and a curator from IAIA saw that and connected us to Sarah. And so that's how the work ended up going out to the East Coast.
Awesome. We're on to John.
Here's one. And so in that time, I would say that Brenda and I got to be good friends, and that my interest in her work was really there because there's a really strong thread of Americanism, but also her influences of travel and native are super, super interesting. And I think that Brenda's work is not only technically incredibly strong, but also really, really interesting. And so I think if Brenda wants to, we'll get you in here, Brenda. We'll let you tell your story. So, Brenda starts graduate school, and she is, she's with Tom, and I love me some Tom, Brenda's husband. He is like the nicest man ever. And they get married in college and have 2 kids, and they move to Japan. And I want you to tell your story, Brenda. Tell us your story.
The fun part of the story is we never expected to be living in a little small, Okinawa actually, small island. And you would think there's nothing to do there on such a small amount of space. And actually, we were there back and forth almost 7 years. And the culture itself is what it inspired me. So we lived off base. We lived in a village, which helped a deal. We were one of three Americans on the mountain, Pikazu, and we actually were immersed within the, which is quite a. And so I worked with weavers there for years and knew them well, and went to school there to learn the language and everything. And what I'm telling you is there was a time within the culture, which is very contemporary now, where because of their strategic location in the world, there are many large countries that wanted to occupy them. From the 1300s on, they were being occupied by different larger countries, China and Japan, and eventually during World War II, the Americans as well. And so the thought came to me, what I was inspired by was, how does a people who are influenced by others keep their own language, their own culture? How do they survive under this and come out okay? So a lot of the paintings are abstracted, but they're really quite truly stories of survival, truly stories of what happens in chaos and the refinery in the midst of chaos. And so as I was learning all these painting techniques, I was also learning the refinery of lines and weaving that are in the paintings. They're all hand done, hand painted, 25 or so, 30 layers of painting that I'm describing to you weavers and the things that I was recording visually. So I came back to the United States, and my mother in Oklahoma. There was the first Red Earth powwow, which was really historic in Oklahoma because there were so many different tribal affiliations that came to celebrate together. And my mother said, come back for that. I want you to see that. I want you to be there. So I did, and was overwhelmed with the visual part of it. The stimulation for me, unbelievable. And so that part of it in the paintings as well. And then I began to look back my family history, my Chickasaw history, that goes, I can trace it back to 15 or 730. So I wanted to know more about my ancestors and my people. And as I did, I realized the history that I was learning in Okinawa was similar to the history that I'm learning now about the removal of Native Americans. We're still uncovering our stories. We're still telling our. And so it was a very important time for me to record our history as best I could, perhaps abstractly. There are my stories. Heather, you jump in here with questions.
Well, and I think that, that was something that you and I are both so interested in from a painting perspective. Like you talked about the abstraction and layers and washes. So I'm a watercolorist, and Sarah mentioned that, and you did ink wash painting in your training in Japan, and that's something that's so interesting. So you might talk about like the technique of how you did that and how you learned that and why that was so fascinating and how that really interested you so much.
Well, I did. I went every week to study with some masters who were sumie painters, which is really ink and water. Sounds so simple, but it's an extremely complicated technique. And I painted and painted and painted. And the children in Japan were learning to use brushes, and we don't have that technique. And so being able to use a brush so well with just no color, but all sorts of varieties of the grays, extremely beautiful to learn and hard. Anyone who's ever done calligraphy will understand what I'm saying. And so that was a gift. The other gifts were the potters there. And I studied with the potters, and potters from all over the world come to Okinawa because their traditions are 600 years old. They do the same glazes, same kind of clay body. And Bernard Leach was there, Hamada, some of the famous potters in the world, all studied or went to study in Okinawa. So this small little island was popping with creativity, popping with things to learn. And so anytime, there's always more to learn. And so when came back, what I brought back with me from Okinawa were my visual memories of all these styles, all these people moving into the dance and the music. So those things I was carrying with me when I went to powwows, and I saw all these moving pieces of color. And so in my work, it's pieces of color. There's nothing about it that's traditional. There's no piece on the painting that says, oh, this is Kiowa, or I am taking, though, references from the photographs that I was. So I'm looking at photographs that I have to myself and taking pieces of that and putting that into the, and so they're my record. And I think that sometimes I want to say about instruction for children, when you're teaching a child in the beginning, my early teacher said to my mother, let her play, let her do anything that she wants to do. Don't correct her and don't give her rules about painting. Let her play until she's old enough to develop her own style. And so when you look at art history and you look around, you look for the people who have something that's totally unique, that's particularly cut out of them. And so my story is my painting, and it's unique because it's only my way of, and I think that's what will make an artist continue to paint and not be discouraged or quit, as if you are challenged for your whole life to say what you need to say.
But I think that's what's so interesting about the work for me, Brenda, is that it's, and I wrote about you once, and I said that it's, you know, you, whether it was you living in Japan or you going to the Red Earth, that you, or traveling with the, you know, the Episcopal priest from Africa, that it was the absorption of all of your experiences with these cultures, and you sort of digested them in, and they became a part of you, and your love of travel. And you could see that it came through the paintings, but nothing was really literal. It wasn't like, this is a Chickasaw headdress, but you could recognize the sort of motif and the reference, and you could see it there. But that's what I loved, because there are parts of, you know, Native paintings that for me can be times where they're just very literal. And I love that yours are so nuanced, that they have so much, I can feel the dance through like the rhythm and the pattern and the color, that they have a lot of movement and energy, which is something I love from like an art historical perspective, because they really, I can feel that, you know, the color and the way it kind of vibrates across the page and all of that. That's really exciting to me in that way. But it's not, you know, someone banging drums, but you can still feel that rhythm.
Well, I think that's a dilemma sort of that I think happens in Indian country, and it's really interesting. On this board of Institute of American Indians in Arts and Culture in Santa Fe, the university there, the students are 95% American, indigenous, and so they are challenged with coming to a university with their culture. You see, I'm going back now, or I'm going back to Uganda, wherever it is, that I want people to retain their culture, but I want them to retain it and record it in several ways, perfectly legitimate, retain a history part of it realistically, but it's also wonderful if the artist is equipped with storytelling in a totally new way. We're still tied. I'm still tied to my Chickasaw family. I'm tied forever. At the same time, I'm an abstract painter. And so it's kind of wonderful to have that freedom to step into the culture and yet step out too. I think that's the part of it that gives us the freedom to create. And so in Indian country, we've had some people that stepped way, way up, and that's exciting. Our museum there is, well, it's one of the best museums in the country because it's contemporary. It's what's happening now. And I think we want to look at young people. We want to see them creating something new and different. That's why you get to be an art historian, is when you see what happened in the breakthroughs in history, how people do change and evolve and become something on their own particular creation.
And so that's a point that you bring up. So what do you feel like as an artist were some of those breakthrough moments for you? Was that moving to Japan? Was that seeing the powwow? Like, what would you say were some of those aha moments where you had a sort of barrier breaking change that you knew? Was it moving to Japan? When were those moments that were just pivotal that made Brenda Kingery who she is?
Oh, well, a lot of times I go to the small islands for festivals, weaving festivals, and see different kinds of weaving. And one time there was a dance there, and the drums are incredible everywhere. Drums are my soul. And so I saw that, with powwow as well. It moves you unbelievably. So what's fun is they had poles with the Kurosawa movies. If you've seen any of those, there's all the warriors processing with all these banners. And in the movies, there's one, something about El Norte, which is an old movie about moving to the north from Mexico. And that one also going over a mountain with poles and banners. And I called those my paintings prayer warriors, prayer banners. And so I began to be inspired by these poles. And then when I met my Chickasaw history phase, when I realized that we had poles, we had a direction pole that the Choctaws and Chickasaws were to go on and travel. So at some point, that pole and the feather settled to say, this is where we're staying. And that would be Tupelo, Mississippi, is one of the homelands, one of the places. And so Chickasaws now, artists, I'm going next week to meet with the artists to talk about going back to Tupelo, to our grandfathers, and see what they're telling us, see what paintings we come up with. So I'm still being inspired by some of the craziest things. Sometimes it can be, like I say, El Norte, a movie. And I just saw this vision of processions. And the painting that I think is in this exhibit is called Processions. And that's the story of actually the Chickasaws moving through Tupelo on their way to or to Oklahoma territory, because they were removed from their culture. So I'm inspired by the history, and I am still recording that.
I'd say also something I think the audience, whenever we've talked and I've heard other viewers talk to you, that something else that very much influences your work is your spirituality and your connection to religion and God. I think that, you often include blue lines at the top. I think that's something that your audience likes to hear about. And would you mind touching on that for a moment?
No, I'm happy to. That's my creator. And I do believe the blue is in the painting, sometimes on the top. And that was sort of me. I love that. Blue in there because those are blessings for people. I want the paintings to be a blessing for anyone who owns the painting or anyone that sees the painting. I want these to bless, right? I think it's important in this day and age that we have things that are peaceful or that are beautiful or that bless, not always peaceful and beautiful. I have a couple of great paintings in there too, but they're all blessings, all things that I'm telling you, and blessings.
Yeah. Do we think that the audience or anybody watching has any questions?
I have some questions. So one of the things that's been really interesting, and when you've talked here in the gallery and you've touched on it a little bit tonight, is this kind of lineage of support that has come up. You said your mother was very supportive and your grandmother was very supportive of you. And you have also been incredibly supportive with your work with Threads of Blessing. I'm interested in hearing how you think we can help support new voices in the arts and voices that we haven't traditionally heard from in the past.
Well, that's the funniest thing, because I didn't mean to do that, to reach out. There's, early on, 20 years ago, I went to Honduras, and I had a big 4x5 piece that we'd drawn the Epiphania on. We took it to a group of 6 women in a carport. And the women had no electricity. They had no running water. This is a place where you can't someone in the way. And my thinking after this, I didn't invent this. This was a blessing. This was a creator thing. Was every culture has the arts, and we are responsible for more than just something on the wall. We are responsible as artists to reach out to others and empower them to do things for themselves. And these women were so excited. They did some fabulous embroidery, which means even more amazing because I don't even sew. But these women caught on quick that a needle and thread would change their lives. This piece we sold, and they started a daycare center with that funding. And these women were supporting themselves. What more, what beauty can you offer to the youth than to give them something to do on their own? And so there was that Threads of Blessing, and then there's the IIA, where the students on scholarship. And I think, oh my gosh, how do we raise up kids? How do we give them futures where they're independent and they're on their own and they're doing what they were given to do? I'm grateful that 5 or 6 months, my mother actually did figure it out, a teacher did. And then later on, I got a scholarship, which I never would have been able to go to school or study or learn the things I have had I not had someone helping me along the way. So the arts are so important to our culture. It is so important that our artists are respected. Thank you for asking that, Mikey.
Thank you for such a wonderful answer. And I'll remind everybody that if you have any questions for Brenda or Heather, please pop them in the chat and I will read them out on your behalf. It really comes across how supportive you are of your community. Is there anything you've been seeing lately that you're really excited about?
Yeah. I think we had a discussion about that early on before we actually got on the Zoom. And I'm kind of encouraged that when we had this pandemic time to stay home and regroup, there was a time where I looked at it quiet. The cars weren't everywhere, and everybody got to go home. And there was some time in there for me anyway, where there was some peace in there. There was some real had family time. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope that in the future, this Christmas and this time, that we spend time more focusing in on what's good for us, what we've already, what we've collected, and be grateful, I think, for those. So yes, that's something I'd tell you.
Fantastic. We do have some questions coming in the chat, but one of my questions that I'm dying to ask is, the show has been really fantastic. Everyone who's come in to see it has been overwhelmed by just how much is here, how much work has gone into this project, and being able to see your career. And I'm really interested to hear what's next for you, Brenda.
Well, next is amazing. I came back from this exhibition and had lunch with another museum director, and he asked me if I would join them for another exhibition. So I'm busy now painting like crazy, which is my happiness. That's my joy. So I'm painting for an exhibit at a Briscoe Museum, which I'm looking forward to. And then I'm opening up in a new gallery or two, one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and one in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So my life is booked. However, as I said, in a week, I'm going to speak to young Chickasaw artists. They're all my sons. They're young. Talking about this summer, we want to get in our cars and drive back to Tupelo, and we're meeting with a lot of PhDs who are archaeologists and historians, and we're going to sit around and listen to our history. We're going to listen to what we don't know yet. They're going to feed us with all kinds of wonderful information. And then we're going to actually tour the mounds, and the mounds are in my paintings. I've talked a lot about the mounds, and they're historically fantastic. I mean, there are America's ancient histories, and they're still around. And so it's time for us to record that visually. So we're looking at a special exhibition just on that. So hopefully we get to do that. I'll let you know how this goes.
I'm excited to hear all about it, and I'm glad you're getting the time to paint with exciting things on the horizon. Looking at the question in the audience, Sarah asks, the entire show is painting. Have you ever worked in different mediums or different processes outside of painting?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I was in Okinawa. I went and sat with the potters, and they have a kick wheel and they kick backwards. And the clay body is, I never would go with the guys to do the clay because there's so much haboos, there's snakes everywhere. So I let them bring the clay in. But I'd go down to the village and work with the potters. And so I watched them a lot, and I was trying to figure out glazes. So I ended up doing my master's thesis on ceramics and the history of how this all began. Then I did paintings, some of them on that. But then when I got back to OU, that was my big goal. So I mixed my own porcelain clay body from chin to chin, the old historic Chinese porcelain. So I made these tiny, difficult, it's like throwing cottage cheese. Porcelain's really hard to do. So I was doing those with these tiny glazes. So yes, I loved it. But I found that it's totally time consuming. And I was in graduate school, and my husband was in Vietnam and taking care of 2 children. And there was no way I could get over and do the trimming or the glazes at the right time of night. So I thought maybe I better, and I decided I can only do one thing well. Let's focus and keep to one thing. So that's when I gave up ceramics. But it is my favorite in my collection. You can see behind me, I collect.
Fantastic. And just to remind anybody in the audience, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. Now, speaking with a lot of people here in the gallery, the one question that comes up over and over again is, how long do each of these pieces take you to make?
A long time. When I talk about lines, sometimes if you see these on Zoom, you won't see up close all the little lines. All those lines are hand done. So this is very much almost like weaving, because it takes forever for me to finish a painting. I talked about, I think earlier, finishing a painting, sometimes it's over in a hurry, but that may mean a month or 2 or 3 months or longer. I've been working on one piece upstairs now for 5 months now, and it still isn't finished. So they're time consuming, and each layer of color some of those colors are 7 or 8 layers of color so that they pop. And with acrylics, you have to layer it. I used to do oils. I used to do portraits. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I imagine too, I'm also a painter, and I find the process of painting is very much a dialogue. We spend an immense amount of time trying to tell the painting what to do, and then you have to take some time to stop, listen, and let the painting tell you what it needs. And I imagine with all of that color as well, you're having to react in real time to what's happening on the surface of that canvas.
The surface argues with me often.
Mm-hmm.
And directs me. I find that I have this great idea, And it's never mine at the end of the painting. The painting directs everything I do. So it's a great mystery as I go through one of those horizontal pieces. It's a road map. It's almost like those old Chinese um, scroll paintings where you just keep working at it and it keeps evolving along, but you don't direct it.
Fantastic. Carol Levis in our audience asks, do your children have artistic ability and are they following in your footsteps?
My daughter paints the most gorgeous, intricate furniture, chairs you've ever seen. However, she could have made a living as an artist painting furniture. She had a great start and everything sold out, but she became a banker instead and is quite happy and successful. So I give her my credit. It's a better, I'm happy for her. But I have the chairs in my kitchen and I'm most proud of those. And my son started out painting, both of these kids, in fact, the grandkids even, when they come to visit, that's primary in our families. They all draw and paint. They've all been raised until, this is interesting, they're 6 years old or start school, which is where a lot of children lose their creativity. They forget their imaginations, and it's so sad. I wish that I had more time with them.
Yeah, funny. Matisse always said he spent his whole career trying to get back to painting like a child.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, we danced in Uganda. We danced with the women. They put down their needle and thread, and we all get up and play the drum and dance. I know it's fantastic. And the point is, when we came back home, I thought with a Sunday school class of 6-year-olds, I could get them to dance. And they were done. I mean, they had no idea how to move. And I thought, my gosh, we've got to work on this imagination part.
Fantastic. Our audience is also asking if they're, considering the time of the year that we have, is there anything that you are thankful for at the moment?
Yes. I feel guilty to say I'm thankful to be here. I know I would like to say there's so many families that have lost ones to pandemic, but I'm so grateful for what we have. One of the things in Uganda is a lack of water. One with the Navajos is a lack of water. I am so grateful for water. I'm so grateful that we have that. Next time you take a glass of water, be grateful. Or next time you take a bath or a shower. When I think of bathing in Uganda with a cup and a little bucket of water, I remember how much we have.
Thank you. Heather, I had a question for you too. As the curator of the show, and you're also a painter yourself, how does your painting practice influence your curatorial practice?
Oh, well, when it comes to this show, I think I recognize that I do not remotely have the patience for the work that Brenda does at all, because when she talks about the layers, I think she really, really means, I mean, Brenda, how many hours do you think you paint a day?
I paint every day, probably 5.
Right. So, I mean, I think that there has to be like, and she is down there with like a little brush, just, and like, I remember in art school, so I was a watercolor major very specifically, and I know that people can make fun of that. That's fine. I've had that many times. I'm totally okay with that. And there were sort of two sides of the watercolor department, the abstract-y studio art side, and then there was the illustration side. And when Brenda mentioned that the Asian students, they all had learned to paint with a calligraphy brush, well, that was very, very true. So 90% of the department was Asian students, and they were really, really, really good, because American students had very much grown up with a different way of learning how to hold a brush and a pencil, and they just have a different handle in the way that and even in an art department, they have learned to stroke a paintbrush in a different method, like acrylic painting, oil painting. It's a different behavior in the way we teach our children to hold a utensil. And Asian students have different dexterities. Would you agree with that, Brenda?
Absolutely. And
Completely distinct.
history, if you
Brenda has Asian dexterity, and you do. She does, and she was able to take. So what's fascinating to me as a painter is that I don't. Well, I mean, when I was in school, I really watched those students, and I was able to really. I still show to my paint if I teach an independent study watercolor every now and then, because we don't have that class where I teach. I will pull out an example and say, when I was working really hard, this is what I could do. I don't do this much anymore. And it's really these tight little lines and all these little tiny white lines and things like Brenda does. And I think like this would give me a seizure if I had to do it now. And I can't even see that close. And I think, oh my gosh, Brenda's, 40 years older than me. But so it's incredible to me that she is still painting like that, because it's very difficult. But Brenda learned under the American tradition, which is completely distinct. And then she moved to Asia and was able to incorporate and adapt and put that Asian tradition of a completely distinct brush and model on top of that. And so her work is really a unique blend of American expressionism, but Asian stylistically and ink washing technique on top of that, which is very, very difficult. I think that's another thing that has to be recognized, is that the technical aspect of what she's capable of doing is not even something that we don't even teach our children cursive in school anymore overall. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, does anyone else in the audience have any questions before we begin to wrap up for the evening? Last chance. I always feel everyone has a question 10 minutes after the time they needed to ask it. All right. Well, in that case, going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you first and foremost to our guests tonight, and thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciate your support. If you would like to know more about the show, please reach out and take a look at our website here at the Cahoon. Brenda Kingery show is ongoing until December 19th, and it should not be missed. If you enjoyed this panel, please check out our other panels, interviews, studio visits, and more on our YouTube channel. It would be a great help to us if you hit the subscribe button. This will help us continue to bring you more exciting virtual programming to enjoy. You can also stay connected with what we're doing at the Cahoon Museum by signing up on our website to receive emails that will let you know of future events. If you'd like to support our work here at the museum, please consider making a donation or joining us as a member as we continue to bring you new exhibitions and programming. And don't forget, connect with us on social media to stay up to date with our day-to-day activities here at the Cahoon Museum. Thank you all and have a wonderful night. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome.